Leader. I observed that the Minister of Education was originally scheduled to make his presentation in the sectoral debate today. On the new schedule, there is no provision for the Minister of Education to participate in the sectoral debate. Now, Mr. Speaker, the sectoral debate is the opportunity for the government to outline its major policies and programs for the current year. We have hundreds of thousands of children, parents, their parents, teachers who are very anxious about the uncertainty regarding the reopening of school in September. We're less than 2 months away from that reopening, and the preparation needs to be taking place now. Arrangements need to take place by the end of July for a smooth reopening of the school year. In those circumstances, Mr. Speaker, I think it must be unacceptable to this House that the Minister of Education is not going to participate in this sectoral debate and give a full accounting of the plans for reopening of school in September. And I would ask through you, Mr. Speaker, that he reconsider that position, because I think the country is listening for him to outline what the arrangements are, and I think it's important that we debate it fully in this House. Thank you.
Mr. Bounty, now you're saying that the Minister has so advised you that he does not intend to make a president. Well, let me finish. I would like from what you have said, I get the impression that the Minister of Education has advised you that between now and a relevant time, he has no intention of speaking on the matters you're talking about. Let me ask, Minister Samudo, the leader of government business, opposition business, has indicated, from what I am interpreting, that you have communicated to him that you do not intend to make a statement concerning the opening of schools and other relevant matters, whether sectoral or editorial. The Minister must speak in Parliament on matters relevant to the nation. And when he speaks in sectoral or in constituency-wise, does not prevent him as a minister from making a statement. I'm asking the Minister to answer as to whether or not you intend to allow schools to be reopened without making a statement, as is inferred by opposition member, Mr. Samuda.
Mr. Speaker, the provision within the arrangement for sectorial presentations is a mechanism by which a minister speaks to the House about aspects of the portfolio that he holds responsibility for. In a discussion with the leader of opposition business, I indicated to him, first of all, that I was very unhappy with the way the sectorial debates have gone this year. Because inasmuch as the obligation rests with the leader of government business to make a presentation to this honorable House, it rests equally, arguably not with as much gravity, but it rests with each opposition spokesman officially named in this country by the leader of the opposition. And Mr. Speaker, there are several, today not excluded, several members who have given an undertaking to speak and have simply not done so. Would you like me to call them out for you? On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, I don't think there's hardly anyone who has given more statements by ministers than the Minister of Education. I cannot recall anyone responding as fulsomely as the Minister of Education on every occasion requested to do so. And indeed, in addition to that, speaks at several press conferences where the programs and policies that will guide us in the future are outlined. Every single moment of significance, that is brought to the attention of the Minister of Education, he comes to Parliament and he explains what is done. So it is disingenuous to suggest that the Minister of Education has not taken full advantage of the opportunities to present the position of the Ministry of Education. But on the other hand, since they are so anxious to hear me present on education, the country hears me. Let me explain to you. The country hears me more than the fact of the matter, Mr. Speaker. There is a facility offered to every minister, unlike the opposition spokespersons. There is a facility offered in this honorable House to enable a minister of government to make a statement on his portfolio on every sitting of the House. On every sitting. And it is contained in the first order of business, statements by ministers, where he is entitled to speak for, I believe, 30 minutes. 12 in the first instance. Well, I intend to utilize that facility fulsomely. But on the other hand, I will make a presentation to the Parliament just prior to the closing next week by the Minister of Transport, who will close the debate. It is my intention to do so. But I always like to send out little teasers because you only have to whisper and they will make an issue of it. So I pull them out. And they are learning a little more and more about that strategy. I just drop a little thing and then it comes out in Parliament. So don't worry, that was only meant to pull you out, and it did. So, Mr. Speaker, I will make a statement prior to the member, that great constituency of Western St. Mary, and Minister of Transport and Mining, and they will hear the full story of what are the plans and programs for the Ministry of Education leading us into next year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I am happy that
you are to remember that
you need to
because
recognize
of the privileged position in which you now hold, that you make a comment to the member. And we cannot have a debate. If you want to debate, then you have to carry a resolution. So you want to further comment on what you said?
Yes, just to say, Mr. Speaker, and I know you have the interest of the House and the nation in your presiding over its affairs. And the reason a debate is preferred to a statement is that the debate allows a full interrogation of the policies and programs that the government puts forward. And the Minister of Education points out that many of the opposition spokespersons or shadow ministers have had to change because there's no point in you speaking before the government minister has spoken and outlined the policies, and then you come with a critique or alternatives. So that is why in the budget debate, the Minister of Finance speaks before the opposition spokesman. And when the minister then says he will speak just before the closing, that is really preventing the Parliament from having a real debate on what those issues are. When the minister gets up with a statement, you constrain us from going beyond a short response and a few questions. But in a debate, there is an opportunity to fully ventilate the issues. And on such an important thing as the reopening of school in these uncertain COVID times, Mr. Speaker, I believe that the minister should make his statement and allow for an opposition response, having had a chance to consider it.
Okay. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Nomination, Selection and Appointment to Boards Regulations 2020. The Public Bodies Management and Accountability Nomination, Selection and Appointment to Boards Regulations 2020 Resolution. Corrigendum to the Special Report of Investigation, Report Number 2, conducted into allegations concerning certain donations which were made by Petrojam Limited to organizations and causes for the period April 2016 to March 2018. Certified appropriation accounts, Registrar General's Department for 2016-2017.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motion given orally, questions and answers to questions, motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to the sitting of the House, motions for leave to introduce bills, presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained, public business. Mr. Semuda. Sorry. What's that? Presentation of bills?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Permission to speak from a seat other than my own.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, today I present briefly the bill entitled An Act to Amend the Special Economic Zone Act for consideration of this Honorable House. Mr. Speaker, since taking office in February 2016, steps have been taken to have an integrated framework in place for the Special Economic Zone regimes, for which the Special Economic Zone Act was passed in January 2016 and made effective in August 2016. And as members will recall, the Special Economic Zones regulation more recently gazetted in September 2017. So, Speaker, members will also recall that when the Act was first passed, Minister was defined at Section 2 as a minister without portfolio for responsibility for industry. And the Act went into effect with the same portfolio designation. On this administration taking over, the regime was placed under the portfolio of the Minister with responsibility for special economic zones, which is in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. For continuity and technical accuracy, in December 2017, Section 2 was amended by deleting the definition of minister. Consequent on this deletion, the references to the word minister as used throughout the Act is now interpreted as an operation of law based on the Interpretation Act. Mr. Speaker, it is on the basis of ensuring continuity and technical accuracy throughout the Act that we now take the bill to amend Part 2 of the third schedule of the Act by deleting paragraph 11B to reflect the change in portfolio responsibility from the Minister with responsibility for industry to the Minister responsible for economic growth and job creation. Mr. Speaker, the paragraph currently provides that 1.1, the board shall consist of B, a senior public officer in the ministry responsible for industry, nominated by the permanent secretary in the ministry responsible for industry, who shall be the members ex officio. The amendment table today reads, B, a senior public officer in the ministry responsible for special economic zones, nominated by the permanent secretary in the ministry responsible for special economic zones, who shall be a member ex officio. Mr. Speaker, the bill is tabled for your consideration. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the amendment is non-controversial, but in one sense unnecessary. The Minister quite rightly points out in the statement that having made the definitional change in minister in Section 2 of the Act, then the interpretation act, the interpretation given to minister wherever it occurs in the Act would operate by law, which is the Interpretation Act. And therefore, really, this is inconsequential and unnecessary. However, what I think is far more substantive and one that we should be paying very keen attention to is some of the operations of the Act, which, having gone through some review, might have been cleared up by now, simply because at the time the Act was passed in the House, it was under extreme work pressures. There was a new piece of legislation, very far-reaching, and offering benefits to those who would use the Act. There are important other issues, and I wonder, Minister, if the whole matter of the transitioning period in the bill, in the Act itself, could not be examined, and that more substantively, these are some of the changes that we should be looking at what happens when you have, as we do now, a situation where the fiscal benefits under the Act expires in 2019, December 2019. But because of the date chosen for the effective date, which is August 1st, 2016, 4 years after that will take you into July 2020, and yet the fiscal benefit would have expired in December of last year. The question I'd want to know is what happens to those entities that are still transitioning under the Act, which it allows to go up until July 2020 of this year. Are they still benefiting from the fiscal measures or the fiscal incentive under the Act? These are substantive, these are money issues, and I'd be interested to know what is the situation as it applies because of the effective date chosen at the time to be August 1st, 2016. But it's non-controversial, and it's really a preference of the minister responsible.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Speaker, just a few comments in relation to this non-controversial amendment. From its inception, the regime of the SEZ had relevance to the operations of the business process outsourcing sector. And I know that the sector has been lobbying government to see it for its own peculiarities. And I'm interested to hear where those discussions, negotiations even are at this stage. And I suspect also that you must be contemplating some broader framework for amendments to accommodate the BPO sector. But there's one aspect of it that I think is so relevant now that I would urge the minister to give a response, and that has to do in this environment of COVID-19, where people are allowed to work from home. And the regime contemplates a physical establishment. And we're seeing more and more businesses have to get into virtual spaces. And I wonder where the government is in relation to that. I note that a special period, a special dispensation window was granted for the companies to utilize computers and other equipment away from the premises. But that period was restricted, and I'm aware that by September, that period will end. Now, these businesses have to plan in advance. I'd like the minister to advise whether or not an extension will be given so that the work from home facility can be extended. There are some other considerations, because when you work from home, you now have to incur, as the worker, more cost for your electricity and telecommunications. And I would like to understand whether or not there is contemplation for those utilities that the workers will now have to bear. So the question is there going to be a legal framework to enable work from home as not just a temporary facility, but really a long-term arrangement to facilitate the BPO sector?
Mr. Speaker, there's a simple point I want to raise for the minister. I remember when Minister Samuda was minister in charge of commerce, this big argument about the Caymanas economic zone and the logistic hub. I mean, we have been talking about these things for a very long time. How is a country? I mean, can a country like Jamaica afford this time lag in terms of implementation of projects? I mean, this thing is about almost 10 years old now. I mean, the country, we have lost the opportunity. Well, I was there, but I can tell you, we have lost a great opportunity, I believe, of advancing. Every day I drive past Caymanas Park, and I look over where we should have the economic zone. It's there in Ruinet, and we pass here every day. Prime location, near to the port, near to the airport, near to the population centers. So, and it's also, well, very enough, it's a different kettle of fish. But, Minister, I think we need to look at this thing in terms of time. What timeline are we looking at in terms of kickstarting these things, even this time? Thank you.
Order, please.
Questions as they came. As it relates to my colleague, Member of Parliament from Western St. Andrew, I will get that information for you as it relates to the transition that you mentioned. In relation to my colleague from East Kingston and Port Royal, to say to you that you will recall that the Prime Minister, in the height of the pandemic, named a BPO task force for which he had asked me to chair. That BPO task force presented its report to the chairman, who happens to be the Honourable Minister of Finance. 2 weeks ago, and just today before coming to Parliament, it was presented to the Prime Minister. So you will hear more about the overall task force reports. However, to say to you that just last week I mandated the SEC to meet with the BPO industry. They had a meeting last week, Friday, and reported back to me. And by this Friday, there should be a document to be presented to me as it relates to post-COVID BPO amendments. And that will take into consideration what you have said in relation to the work from home. There are some preliminary recommendations which I won't want to disclose at this point. But just to say to you that it is a major industry. It has the ability to recover the fastest and create additional jobs. So we are taking it as a priority, and you will hear more about that. And most importantly, member, is that I'm doing it in a way that we're going to get consensus, not where the government puts down and then you get a backlash or you get criticisms. So we're trying to have a holistic approach because of the importance and the timeline in which we need to do this. So if I was to say to you that I expect that before the end of this month, we would be able to outline to you what the new dispensation will be and what amendments, if any, that will be required, legislative and otherwise. Lastly, to my colleague from Clarendon, it is almost coincidental that the last meeting that I had before coming to Parliament today was a presentation by the SEC to the Prime Minister to get some kind of sign-off in relation to the direction of the Caymanas economic zone. I can't agree with you more in relation to the timeline that it has taken. We know that there was an enterprise team named. We know all of the historic things that have happened. And to say to you that in the post-COVID response by government, that has to be one of the low-hanging fruits. It won't happen overnight, but at least it is and will finally be moved in a direction that we can have a timeline for completion. That presentation went very well. There's to be some additional consultations that he has asked for. But again, that also I'm expecting to be able to share publicly in short order as it relates to that. Because as you said earlier, member, and I agree, there's 500 and odd acres of prime real estate that can do so much in terms of the growth and job creation that we all so badly need. So I thank you for the comments, and we'll keep you updated.
Before you say, could you just clarify something you just said? You said the Caymanas is now 500 and odd acres or 5,000 an acre?
No, the area designated the north side.
Okay, so it is now been reduced?
The north side, yeah.
It has now been reduced.
That's what's available and for the economic zone.
To the other...
Not to mention what other private developers are doing, talking about government.
Okay.
Not the Chinese, separate.
Aren't you going to move to second
So,
reading?
Mr. Speaker, yeah, well, it's over to him now to ask for second reading. Second reading.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Special Economic Zones Act 2020, read a second time.
The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. I put clause 1. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put clause 2. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendments. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the bill be read a third time.
The bill be read a third time. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Now.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Special Economic Zones Act, read a third time and passed.
Mr. Speaker, before embarking on the next item, I want to acknowledge the presence of the member from Northeast Manchester who has had several bouts with medical challenges, and I'm happy. I'm very happy to see him here today. Quite frankly, I didn't expect him out so early, but the good warrior that he is, he has come out to join us. Welcome back, Audley. I am reliably informed, Mr. Speaker, that the Leader of Opposition Business will see to it, use his best endeavors, to see to it that the member from East Kingston and Port Royal, an opposition spokesman on energy, whose minister has spoken some time ago, that he will make his response. Who has given, he opened the debate, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, finally, the member from Southern St. Catherine, the opposition spokesman on security, will make the greatest effort to respond to the Minister of National Security who has spoken. So in the case of the opposition, he has 3 major responses to give with 1 day left in the debate. because they were waiting until the minister spoke. The ministers have spoken, but they have been in splendid isolation and silence. So, Mr. Speaker, remember, when you dig a hole, dig two. Mr. Speaker, I will now ask you to invite the Minister of Health to make his contribution to the sectorial debate.
Dr. Tufton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, colleague members in this honorable House. Good afternoon to all. Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by thanking the Most Honorable Prime Minister Andrew Holness for his confidence in me as a member of his cabinet, as well as my cabinet colleagues who have given me dedicated support as I carry out my duties in public health. Mr. Speaker, let me also recognize the support and the dedicated efforts of the public health team, led of course by the Permanent Secretary who is here and the Chief Medical Officer, both of whom, as I believe all of us would like to. I want to also, Mr. Speaker, take the opportunity, despite the physical distancing requirements, there are a few members of St. Catherine West Central, my constituency. They are representing the full contingent, and I think it's not difficult to recognize them in the gallery. They are appropriately dressed. But, you know, I really have to place on record, Mr. Speaker, my absolute thanks to them, because I have been more missing than available, frankly speaking, over the last 5 months in particular because of the COVID challenges. But they have held, Mr. Speaker, in particular, I want to recognize the councillors and my special assistant, Mr. Omar Francis, who may be moving on to bigger things, and he's in the gallery there. I want to recognize him. My personal assistant, Ms. Nicole Banks, who is also in the gallery, who is really committed to giving me as much support as possible in my office at the ministry. Mr. Speaker, I want to recognize, they are not here now, my family, who have continued to give me dedicated support, my wife, my 3 children, and my extended family. Mr. Speaker, I want to say thanks to them. And finally, Mr. Speaker, a number of other supporting team members who are not major transformation in the world. It is a transformation so dramatic that even now, countries are struggling to define what the new normal looks like as they adjust to the changes brought on by COVID-19.
Let's have some order. The member is on his feet making his presentation.
Mr. Speaker, to define the new normal, we must answer the following questions. What is our personal responsibility as it relates to our own personal health? How are we to live in our communities given this new normal? How should we raise our children? How do we in business serve our employees and customers? And all in the context of increased awareness of infection prevention and control. If nothing else, Mr. Speaker, one answer is very clear. We all have a role to play in ensuring individual and community health. Mr. Speaker, in this current dispensation, now more than ever, everyone counts. Mr. Speaker, the world has been reminded that without the protection of the good health of our people, there can be no real or sustainable development. Indeed, COVID-19 has realigned the development thinking and must result in a paradigm shift that brings about health in all policies as a clear direction, Mr. Speaker, for joined-up government. Health in all policies, as the World Health Organization tells us, is an approach that systematically mainstreams health considerations and includes a focus on the impact of public policy, not only on health systems, but also on the social determinants of health. In other words, Mr. Speaker, all of us have a role to play, and both government and the people must rise to the occasion to protect ourselves and our communities. Mr. Speaker, the economic system and those who preside over it at the level of the firm and at the policy level must also pay close attention to health risks that can negatively impact our everyday lives. As a Ministry of Health and Wellness, we have championed individual responsibility in health, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to health, everyone counts and everyone must see themselves as an important cause to include appropriate infection prevention and control measures. Every religious organization counts to enable and empower their congregations to increase health-seeking behaviors and to embrace prevention as a way of life. And every community, Mr. Speaker, counts through a demonstration of responsibility for each of its members, enabling the preservation of each family within the community. The COVID-19 pandemic is the most significant public health challenge that Jamaica and the world has faced since the 1918 Spanish flu, which infected an estimated 500 people and caused a reported 50 million deaths globally. 500 million, 50 million deaths. 500 million. Today, after 6 months, Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has infected more than 10 million people and claimed over 500,000 lives worldwide and counting. This is while requiring a never-before-seen level of resource mobilization to finance national public health response plans. This is in order to protect public health and, in particular, the health of those with vulnerabilities, including non-communicable diseases, or NCDs. Mr. Speaker, as members of this Honorable House will be aware, NCDs have been a scourge on the Jamaican society, with some 70% of Jamaicans suffering from an NCD, including diabetes, hypertension, and cancer, in addition to mental illness. COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, has therefore reinforced the need for persons to know their health status and to engage in good health-seeking behavior. Mr. Speaker, our COVID-19 experience has shown the commitment of this government to public health, with just under $6 billion so far budgeted for the Ministry of Health and Wellness for its response efforts. Of that sum, we have spent in the region of $3.8 billion on containment measures to date. We have also leveraged a joined-up government approach to the pandemic while mobilizing the support of the people of Jamaica to help to protect us all from the COVID-19 risks, including, Mr. Speaker, in terms of expenditure, the provision of some $775 million in financial support to our health authorities to help meet the needs associated with the response efforts, infrastructure upgrade to the tune of more than $89 million, including equipping hospitals with an additional 63 intensive care and high dependency units, the provision of medical equipment such as personal protective gear and COVID-19 test kits to the tune of more than $1.7 billion, and the procurement of more than $500 million in prescription drugs from the National Health Fund to ensure the effective treatment of the symptoms of persons with COVID-19. Other costs, Mr. Speaker, include the retrofitting of facilities to quarantine and/or isolate and care for persons who are suspected or confirmed to have COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, I am comfortable that we have been getting value for money, as evidenced by the slowing of the disease, which has resulted in a less than expected number of cases and hospitalizations here on the island. In fact, Mr. Speaker, Jamaica has so far kept the number of cases below the health system capacity to respond, Mr. Speaker, and that's a very positive indicator of the way we have managed and spent the resources. I give some examples, Mr. Speaker. Of the 737 confirmed cases up to July 6, only 14 or 1.9% have been critically ill, and 11 or 1.5% moderately ill. In addition, Mr. Speaker, after nearly 120 days since the first COVID-19 case was confirmed, Jamaica has had a mortality rate of 1.4% compared to the international rate of between 3 and 4%, Mr. Speaker. A very commendable achievement. Tribute to the public health response to this public health threat. Further, Mr. Speaker, also up to July 6, Jamaica had an 80.2% recovery rate and a hospitalization rate of less than 1% and a reproductive rate of less than 1%. Mr. Speaker, when compared to other jurisdictions, I believe we can safely say that the health system in Jamaica is working to protect the citizens of Jamaica, Mr. Speaker. Tribute to the public health system and to the administration that has given critical support. Mr. Speaker, so I pause here and I ask members to salute with me the public health workers across the length and breadth of Jamaica. These professionals, Mr. Speaker, include our volunteers, among them medical students from the University of the West Indies, who combined represent the heroes of Jamaica's COVID-19 story. These men and women represent the best of Jamaica, demonstrating an unfailing commitment and dedication to the people of Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, we pay tribute to them. Mr. Speaker, I want to also acknowledge the support of my cabinet colleagues, led by Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness. Mr. Speaker, the many hours of deep reflection, robust discussion, and constructive advice have allowed us, as a ministry, as a government, and as a country, to arrive at decisions that have augured well for our current state of affairs, Mr. Speaker. I want you to thank, Mr. Speaker, the opposition members on that side for their understanding and support, particularly through their service on the Joint Special Select Committee of Parliament, which was established to examine COVID matters. Because I believe that for the most part, the opposition members have been very constructive in their discussions, and we have, as a consequence, been able to combine our efforts to advance this process in a constructive way. Mr. Speaker, the slowing of the transmission of COVID-19 has allowed us the time for the building, and this is important, of additional capacity within the public health sector, in line with the 2005 international health regulations. In particular, success to date can be credited to an early health education program, enhanced surveillance, the early institution of restrictions, and the early response to perceived threats and rapid containment exercises. The results, Mr. Speaker, has been increased public awareness and early detection of cases, in addition to our primary healthcare establishment, also enabled us to assemble and dispatch response teams to communities for case investigation and contact tracing, all of which has served us well. Mr. Speaker, I hear other countries talking about contact tracing for the very first time, some many more advanced than us. Well, we have it here in Jamaica, and it has worked for us, Mr. Speaker, an indication of how resilient we are as a public health infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, at the same time, Jamaica moved early to establish quarantine and isolation facilities. to build capacity within our hospitals to respond to the severe cases. We have quarantined sections of the island to conduct investigations and to help to contain the disease. We must remember, however, Mr. Speaker, and this is so important, despite the successes that we have had, let me put it in my own parochial term, COVID still a keep, and Jamaicans must be aware that we cannot afford to let down our guard. We must still be vigilant and take our own responsibility and take this matter very seriously. Mr. Speaker, I pause here to thank the people of Jamaica, because in all of this, they have been the ones, Mr. Speaker, who have supported the health teams in the field as they do their work. They have been willing to participate in interviews, made themselves available for sampling as well as by complying with quarantine rules. And the truth is, this last 4 or 5 months, Mr. Speaker and colleagues, we have seen Jamaicans having to adjust significantly their lifestyle, affecting their livelihood as well as their leisure because of curfews and quarantines and restrictions on certain types of activities. I want to salute the Jamaican people because they have played an important role in keeping down the threat of COVID. Our international partners have been of a valuable support, Mr. Speaker, bilateral and multilateral partners, and there are many, the European Union, China, Cuba, India, the United States of America, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Pan-American Health Organization, the World Health Organization, the United Kingdom, and Japan. Mr. Speaker, just to name a few, I want to salute our partners at the bilateral and multilateral level for the support they have given. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, we have done well so far with COVID-19 based on the professional team of public health experts and the support of civil society and our international partners. I believe we can safely conclude that the gains from our COVID-19 response has also been due in some measure to progress made towards the strengthening of our health system over the last 4 years under this administration, as well as work done to change the public's mindset about health as an individual and collective responsibility. Mr. Speaker, those efforts are contained in the Ministry's 10-year strategic plan, which I tabled last year. Highlights of this plan, Mr. Speaker, includes safeguarding access to equitable, comprehensive and quality health care services, which are essential for promoting and realizing the right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health, increasing and improving health financing for equity and efficiency, making reliable and modern infrastructure available for health services delivery, and ensuring human resources for health in sufficient numbers and competencies. Those are the broad heading which captures the framework, Mr. Speaker, under the 10-year strategic plan, and we have started to implement. We believe that the response to COVID benefited from that longer-term strategic direction. What COVID-19 has taught us, though, Mr. Speaker, is that now more than ever, this strategic plan is more important to build a sustainable health infrastructure for all the people of Jamaica. It is with the goals of the strategic plan in mind that the 5-year capital expenditure plan, also tabled last year, was developed, taking account of key projects and programs within the Ministry of Health and Wellness. I'll name one, Mr. Speaker, which started before my time, but I've had the privilege of providing leadership to conclude, much to the benefit of the country and to the COVID response. I'm proud, Mr. Speaker, to report that the Ministry has now completed the construction of 4 high-dependency units under the Program for the Reduction of Maternal and Child Mortality, PROMAC, at a cost of some $1.5 billion, Mr. Speaker. With these high-dependency units, PROMAC has provided Jamaica with 48 high-dependency spaces, some 38 new high-dependency beds, and 10 new isolation suites, specifically for pregnant women and their newborns. These are in addition to the procurement of 6 ambulances and the purchase of radiographic ultrasound equipment and some 150 midwifery bags to enhance the quality of primary care and to improve the referral system to the tune of some 187.6 million. Money spent, well spent, and we are now reaping the benefits of that spend. We have also trained, Mr. Speaker, some 230 doctors and nurses in specialized programs, including pediatric medicine, obstetrics, and gynecology, as well as intensive care, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, financed by a grant funding from the EU, PROMAC has not only enabled the government to improve facilities for maternal and child health across the island, it was also instrumental in providing critical equipment, including ventilators for the ongoing COVID-19 fight. These ventilators and other equipment, valued at some $622 million, has been deployed to our hospitals to increase the number of high dependency units and ICU space. These facilities, Mr. Speaker, are in preparation for the reality that we are not yet out of the woods, Mr. Speaker. COVID is still a threat, but we are putting the infrastructure in place to confront and to minimize that threat with the support of the Jamaican people. Mr. Speaker, COVID has highlighted another very important lesson, Mr. Speaker. This is the threat or the challenge of NCDs, or non-communicable diseases, Mr. Speaker. The last several months, Mr. Speaker, in keeping with health system strengthening, we have embarked on a plan I announced in my last sectorial, funded by the Inter-American Development Bank and also supported by the EU, to advance the strengthening of our health infrastructure. Called the Health System Strengthening Program, Mr. Speaker, it has as a main objective the improvement of the management and efficiency of health services through the provisions of technical assistance to review and develop care pathways and protocols. We're also introducing health information systems, which is critical to the improvement of our patient care, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in a matter of time, gone will be the days when you go to the health center and have to send for your docket in a dust-infested room, sometimes can't finding it, Mr. Speaker, because the government made a commitment 3+ years ago that we were going to digitize our records and establish this health system platform, and that commitment is now going true to form, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, within the next 2 months, the Ministry will launch a major tender for the retrofitting of some 110 health centers across the island with technology that will provide high-speed internet capacity, modern ICT infrastructure to include laptops and tablets, and the widespread use of the WHO's Go Data platform for the collection and analysis of surveillance data for the detection and management of disease, Mr. Speaker. IDB has funded this project at a cost of some $350 million. Money in place, Mr. Speaker, money that will be spent to improve our health infrastructure. This investment will enhance more efficient information exchange between healthcare providers and patients, thus reducing the waiting time because of more efficient transaction management in order to administer care to our patients. Also, Mr. Speaker, within the next 4 months, the Ministry will be launching a tender for an electronic health record system at a cost of more than $800 million that will manage patient information, further improving the management of patient records and treatment, such as telemedicine, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to moving the public health infrastructure into the modern times, Mr. Speaker, and we have started. Mr. Speaker, Cornwall Regional Hospital remains a main health service provider in the Western region. Since 2016, the hospital has been going through major repairs under a rehabilitation project that has experienced several challenges. These challenges have included a changing scope of work and the fact that the Ministry, along with the Western Regional Health Authority, have had to operate all aspects of the services while repairing the infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. In addition, frankly speaking, the COVID emergency, the COVID pandemic, has contributed to a slowing down of the rehabilitation of Cornwall because we have had to divert focus, attention, personnel, in some instances, to dealing with the COVID challenge. Mr. Speaker, to date, the government has spent more than $3.5 billion in the rehabilitation of the facility and the creation of new infrastructure to support service provision to the citizens in that part of the island. Currently, despite the challenges associated with the rehabilitation efforts, Cornwall is providing 80 to 100% of all the services it was providing before the rehabilitation process started, Mr. Speaker. 80 to 100%. The hospital provides 90% of all outpatient services and 100% of all surgical cases, Mr. Speaker. And that's important to say because I want to use the opportunity to say to the people of Jamaica, and in particular the people of Western Jamaica, that Cornwall is open and available to provide care to you, despite the challenges of the restoration and rehabilitation. When it is finished, we thank you for your patience. Cornwall is going to be one of the most modern hospitals in the Caribbean region. It's going to take time, but we will get there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in my presentation last year, I announced an initiative to improve access to critical diagnostic services by outsourcing to private providers where our hospital infrastructure was either non-existent or not working. A part of the reduced waiting time initiative experience of users of our public health system. Mr. Speaker, the absolute reality of this situation is that over many years, we have neglected to retrofit, to upgrade, to maintain our hospital infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. As a consequence, the infrastructure has depreciated, in some instances, Mr. Speaker, become obsolete, and we found ourselves as a government in a position where we needed to respond quickly to the challenges of Jamaicans who wanted diagnostic tests, CT scans, X-rays, but the hospital system just did not have those equipment. And this idea of outsourcing to reduce waiting time, because that was one consequence of not having the equipment, persons remaining in hospital for extended period, is now paying off, Mr. Speaker. The Enhanced Healthcare Services Delivery Project was the result of that assessment, even while we plan to restore equipment in our hospitals under the IDD project. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to report that since the launch of the project in September 2019, approximately 9,000 Jamaicans have received services at a cost of some $368 million, including CT scans, MRIs, ultrasound, angiograms, among other diagnostic services. Mr. Speaker, previously, if the hospital did not have the service, persons would be given a piece of paper to say, go and pay for it and carry back the results. Many Jamaicans could not access critical diagnostic service because they just couldn't afford it. Mr. Speaker, another indication that this government cares about the Jamaican people and is willing to put the resources in public health to respond. And many Jamaicans are the beneficiary of that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have heard the cries of the Jamaican people in not accessing diagnostic services enough in the public health system and not being able to afford it in the private system, and the government has responded, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the project has also partnered with the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development to see the transfer of more than 200 social cases from hospitals to infirmaries and other facilities which are better able to provide for their long-term care. Again, as part of the reduced waiting time, Mr. Speaker, that I spoke of, a lot of persons clinically released, have nowhere to go, end up spending months, sometimes years in the public health system, therefore taking up a bed that could have otherwise been used, Mr. Speaker. As I had indicated before, a single social case can prevent occupancy by at least 49 patients in any 1 year. Mr. Speaker, this intervention with the Ministry of Local Government, Mr. Speaker, has led to some 9,800 patients having access to a bed who otherwise would not have had access if we had these 200 social cases in the hospital. It has also enabled the ministry to allocate 315 beds to our COVID-19 response. Because, you know, what people need to understand, Mr. Speaker, is that everything is related. If we had these social cases in our hospitals, not only could we not treat persons who needed immediate care, we would not have had the excess bed capacity to create these COVID wards, which we have done to give support to the COVID response. So, Mr. Speaker, it's an initiative that has paid off, again, a demonstration of the caring nature of this government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as noted in the hospital monthly statistical report, since November 2019, hospitals across the island have seen a reduction in the average length of stay and bed occupancy rate. Mr. Speaker, we can deduce that this was due in part to the fact that patients no longer have to wait on an exorbitant amount of time for diagnostic results to be provided, thereby increasing the efficiency of their treatment program. In the coming months, a midterm evaluation, Mr. Speaker, will be done to clearly establish the links between these new initiatives, the outsourcing of diagnostic services, the removal of social cases, and the reduced wait and reduced hospital time, which was the case prior to this initiative being introduced. Mr. Speaker, I believe this has helped, this has contributed to that reduced waiting time. And in the coming months, Mr. Speaker, we intend to work to introduce the surgical component of this agreement. Again, COVID has delayed or distracted or redirect resources from us focusing on this. Mr. Speaker, in terms of vector control and dengue in particular, Jamaica has been dealing with the outbreak of dengue within the population since January 2019. We have put in place several measures to minimize the impact of vector-borne diseases and dengue in particular. The ministry, Mr. Speaker, just to remind this House and the country, launched a massive communication and behavioral change campaign that sought to reinforce the principles of personal responsibility for health, employed more than 1,000 vector control workers, increased the number of dedicated vector control vehicles, Mr. Speaker, the largest investment in vector control infrastructure, vans or pickups and fogging machines, Mr. Speaker, to the tune of some $289 million. They have never seen such an increase, Mr. Speaker, I'm told, by those who have worked in that unit for over 20-odd years. Collaborate, Mr. Speaker, with the Municipal Corporation and the National Solid Waste Management Authority for the removal of bulky waste that harbor and provide a safe haven for the dreaded Aedes aegypti mosquito. Mr. Speaker, this is the first that this will be known publicly, and I am proud of it and proud of the team in public health. I am happy to announce, Mr. Speaker, that based on the most recent data coming out of the National Epidemiology Unit, the dengue outbreak, Mr. Speaker, is now officially over, Mr. Speaker. And that is worth noting and a tribute to the efforts of the government and the renewal of the infrastructure, including what you're seeing on the screen here, Mr. Speaker, with the foggers and the pickups. Mr. Speaker, the last 4 months, and I should explain what the outbreak ending means, Mr. Speaker. It means that we are no longer having cases of dengue above the threshold case. In fact, the last 4 months, we have seen below threshold numbers. 37 cases in March, 2 cases in April, 8 cases in May, and 2 cases in June. Mr. Speaker, it's been a long struggle, but the government has given support. The public health team have worked. The infrastructure has responded, and we can say Jamaicans are safer as it relates to dengue. We're now out of the... I want to say, Mr. Speaker, for the record, the government did the right thing in retooling and retrofitting the vector control unit. Now, let's bear in mind, Mr. Speaker, that dengue is endemic. The Aedes aegypti mosquito is here, and therefore we can't let down our guard. And in the next week or so, we're going to be reporting to the country on how we have gotten out of this, but what we need to do to stay out of it. And in that regard, again I say, personal responsibility, individual responsibility, not having the breeding sites, informing yourselves as to what to do to protect yourself, all of that is going to be absolutely critical. But it is a good thing that we can now breathe a sigh of relief that dengue and the outbreak has now passed and we're moving into a new period, Mr. Speaker. Thanks again to the Vector Control Unit and the Public Health Team and the support from the government. Mr. Speaker, the results of the vector control interventions are that the Aedes index for the entire island as at April 2020 stands at approximately 11% and almost 40% reduction in the presence of the mosquito and that particular mosquito. Still, Mr. Speaker, it's necessary that the persons continue to maintain vigilance in the practice of the measures to reduce the mosquito population, including searching for their surroundings weekly for breeding sites and destroying them, covering water storage containers, punching holes in cans and bottles before discarding them. And again, Mr. Speaker, we will do more and say more about this in the weeks ahead in anticipation of the rainy season that will come. Another effort, Mr. Speaker, on which we have extended considerable effort towards behavioral change, because that's really what it is, Mr. Speaker, how we behave within our environment. Public health is more about behavior, Mr. Speaker, than it is about cure. And that's a message we have been emphasizing and will continue to emphasize. This, Mr. Speaker, has captured the individual responsibility for good health in the Jamaica Moves program, which has gone regional, Mr. Speaker. And there is now a Caribbean Moves program, which we are proud to say our neighboring countries have actually adopted the Jamaica Moves model. I personally participated in the launch of Barbados Moves, St. Kitts and Nevis Moves, Trinidad has launched Trinidad Moves, and CARPA, the Public Health Agency, has combined recently with the Caribbean Development Bank to provide funding to establish Caribbean Moves in the region to give support to an initiative that Jamaica started. Another proud moment that I believe we can all be recognized. All, Mr. Speaker, all in the interest of confronting the NCD, or non-communicable disease epidemic that we face as a people, regionally and as a country, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this phase of the Jamaica Boost program has included also, very importantly, a big focus, Mr. Speaker, on our schools. And it's understandable why this is important, Mr. Speaker. The Global School-Based Health Survey 2010 and 2017 indicate that the rates of overweight and obesity, a known modifiable risk factor for NCDs, are trending upward, with an overall increase in rates among adolescents in the last decade. Further, increases in consumption of sweetened beverages, Mr. Speaker, limited fruit, and limited water intake, together with low physical activity levels, have been found to be significantly associated with the overweight obesity challenge among our young people, particularly between the ages of 6 and 10 years. Given this fact, Mr. Speaker, Jamaica Moves is now in more than 200 schools, Mr. Speaker, despite the disruption that we have had since January, reaching at least 72,000 students, and with collaboration taking place with teacher training institutions as well as with student leaders, to bring about the change we want to see among our young people who we wish to transform into change agents for a healthier Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, this government is heavily focused on prevention. And it has to start in terms of health-seeking behavior with our children. Our adults have to give guidance, but the fact is old habits die hard. So the Jamaica Moves initiative in school was critical to get our children to learn these behaviors from early, and also to impart some of that knowledge to their adults at home and in their community. And we are proud of the efforts that have been made. Of note, Mr. Speaker, we also sought to create the necessary enabling environment to complement the efforts under Jamaica Moves in terms of the interim guidelines for sugary beverages in schools, and this effort will continue, Mr. Speaker. Interestingly, Mr. Speaker, and again linking to COVID-19, which is a clear and present danger we face, the COVID-19 experience, very important, has taught us, has reinforced, for those who already know, the importance of health-seeking behavior to avoid the vulnerabilities of severe illness from outbreaks. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, the Jamaica Moves concept, which is now focused on everyone counting. Everyone counts, individual responsibility to be your own hero in protecting yourself, is in keeping with the behavioral change that we must push in our society. A big part of the vulnerable community for COVID-19 are persons with comorbidities, hypertension, diabetes, and it's all around, it's primarily around lifestyle. And what we really need as a country is to change lifestyle and use lifestyle to develop habits that will allow us to have a more rewarding and fulfilling life, and not one characterized by illness. And so we commend that program and will continue to advance its worthy cause. Mr. Speaker, in terms of compassionate care, another signature program in the ministry, very proud of that program, Mr. Speaker. We saw the need in public health, this administration, to enhance the customer service response to the delivery of healthcare services. And I've said it over and over, Mr. Speaker, that a big part of the therapy that Jamaicans seek when they go to a health center or a hospital is just the comfort of someone speaking to them, helping them to overcome their issues, not just through clinical services, but just giving advice and showing empathy. And the truth is, too often that was absent from our public health system. And so the Compassionate Care Program was intended to enhance that, Mr. Speaker. And we have launched that program across the public health system, a number of hospitals and health centers, Victoria Jubilee, Cornwall Regional, St. Anne's Bay, Falmouth, Black River Health Services, Noel Homes, Robbins Hall, Kitson Town, St. James Health Services, just to name a few, where we have trained over 3,000 health workers, including clinical, technical, administrative, skilled and non-skilled, Mr. Speaker, all in the effort or the attempt at enhancing good personal customer service interaction with patients, with Jamaicans. It is important that we never ever allow the expertise that we clearly have to compensate for being a friend to those when they need it most, when they need the services of a clinician or otherwise, Mr. Speaker. And that program will continue. Mr. Speaker, another program, the Adopt a Clinic program, which was launched some 2 years ago, has resulted in take-up. And we are happy to say that some 22 clinics have been adopted. 7 are pending, Mr. Speaker. And we have had donors, both from Jamaica but also in the diaspora, committing some 81.4 million Jamaican dollars by, quote-unquote, adopting a primary health care facilities. And that adoption really means giving critical support, financial support, based on the needs of the health center, but also identifying or associating themselves with that facility, visiting when possible, and just sharing and encouraging both staff as well as those who use those community health centers. All part, Mr. Speaker, of rebuilding the fabric of community spirit as we seek to enhance the primary healthcare response, which, based on our response to COVID-19, is demonstrating its resilience and its strength, because that's really where we take on the real challenges. We don't wait until persons require hospital care. So the Adopter Clinic program, Mr. Speaker, will continue.
Members' time for speaking has expired. House Leader.
Sufficient.
Less.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the member be given sufficient time to complete his presentation.
Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it. Dr. Tufton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to my colleagues for allowing the additional time. Mr. Speaker, as we confront the most significant public health crisis that the world has seen, Mr. Speaker, very importantly, COVID-19, we will always, as long as we live, I don't think the world will forget this experience. Not just because we will be trying to come to terms with it, economically or otherwise, but because of the sheer impact it has had on our personal lives, on our communities, on our country, and on the world. So we will be trying to come to terms with this for some time. But you know, Mr. Speaker, as we confront it, I want to just say, Mr. Speaker, and I'm speaking personally now, that I am proud to be a Jamaican at this point in time in our history. And, Mr. Speaker, to have been given the opportunity to serve in public health. Very proud. I am proud to be a member of the administration led by Andrew Holness. And I am proud to lead the nearly 17,000 healthcare workers across the length and breadth of Jamaica. The Permanent Secretary, the Chief Medical Officer, Mr. Speaker, who have provided critical leadership. You know, Mr. Speaker, we oftentimes, Mr. Speaker,
Members.
Mr. Speaker, we oftentimes do not give ourselves enough credit. But the truth is that we work each day doing what is necessary to protect the people of Jamaica, Mr. Speaker. That's our primary goal. The management of the most recent threat, COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, is a demonstration of our capacity to respond to a prevailing threat, public health threat. Yet we have some work to do. And so while we must feel proud, we're entitled to feel proud, we should also recognize that there's still a lot of work to be done. This work, Mr. Speaker, includes the recognition and acceptance that the island has now moved from trying to keep COVID out to life or living with COVID. The good news is that we have a plan for this, Mr. Speaker, and that is termed the COVID Recovery Plan, which in due course I will table in this Honourable House so that we can all see what this plan entails. The main features, Mr. Speaker, the plan targets the attainment of an adequate legal framework to support and enable the implementation of actions in response to COVID-19 and any other biohazard public health emergency. It all, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, as I said when I started, and I won't be longer than the 10 minutes or so, COVID-19 has really, or should really, teach us some serious lessons as it relates to the importance of public health. There is no economic health if we do not have sound public health. And we could argue that at the very micro level, in terms of productivity, worker productivity, and the health of a worker. But as we have witnessed with COVID and its impact on the world, it is clear, it is self-evident, it is impatient of debate and discussion that one public health risk can bring the world to its knees and can change life as we know it. And I say this for the firm, I say this for the policymaker, I say this for the individual, for the family member, for the community leaders, because times have to change because of the COVID experience. The protocols that have been established must be observed because of the COVID experience. We have to exist in a different paradigm because of the COVID experience. And Minister of Finance, don't take it the wrong way, but when budget time come around, public health will have to get some more attention because of the public health experience. But I know you mean well and I know you have done well, so I have no fear of that. Mr. Speaker, the plan includes a multi-sectorial, multidisciplinary approach through the strengthening of national partnerships that allow efficient, alert, and response systems for effective implementation of COVID-19 and other emergency responses. Increasing skilled and competent health personnel for sustainable, functional public health surveillance at all levels. Strengthened lab systems to respond to the pandemic and other infectious diseases, as well as strengthened surveillance systems able to detect events of significance for public health and health scrutiny. We also have, Mr. Speaker, a plan for the management of health risks at our air and seaports. Specific actions under the plan, Mr. Speaker, many of which are underway, include the review of the existing legislation to bring them in alignment with the international health regulation requirements and the drafting of policies that support infection prevention and control measures at home, in communities, and at the workplace. The strategic and human resource review of the Health Emergency Operations Center, EOC, to increase the capacity to respond to the multiple and varied disasters and the documentation of EOC procedures. The creation of some 2,208 posts for community health aides. And I want to thank the Minister of Finance because he has made this available, provided the budget to give support, and of course himself, the Honourable Prime Minister, and the Cabinet obviously sees the vision of the new norm, and the administration is responding, and that is commendable. Accelerate tracing programs for contact tracing. As I said, Mr. Speaker, some countries are just learning what contact tracing is. Jamaica have been using contact tracing, and it is largely responsible for the containment of the spread of COVID-19. We send in the army when we have an issue, and they have done well, Mr. Speaker. The creation of 500 posts of public health inspectors and the review of the organization structure for medical officers of health in each parish with a view to enhance the capacity to respond to emergencies. Mr. Speaker, the development of a national lab policy, including a system of licensing of laboratories and requirements for conformity to a national quality standard, is also to be done. One of the challenges we have, Mr. Speaker, is that we have private labs. I've heard the opposition and others say, use the private labs for testing. The reality is that they have to be qualified. Labs have to be accredited. Training has to take place. We're doing it now. We should have done it before. And so one of the lessons coming out of COVID is that we need to strengthen the partnerships that exist so that we can respond to these types of public health threats now and in the future. The plan also, Mr. Speaker, focuses on the development of technical drawings for improved facilities for the processing of travelers by the health team at both of the island's main airports. The COVID experience has shown us the international connectivity of people and countries for all sorts of reasons. And the fact that we have had to manage the control entry, Mr. Speaker, has been a major challenge, but a significant learning experience, and we are not going to allow that crisis to go to waste. We are going to learn and develop new protocols around that. So this will involve infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, like isolation facilities at the airports, procurement of personal protective equipment for ports of entry, and the review and enhancement of protocols for the processing of arrival of passengers to reflect infection prevention and control measures in response to COVID-19, but also beyond. Mr. Speaker, finally, we know that this will not be easy, the work that we have ahead. But as I said earlier, we should not allow a crisis to go to waste, and we will not allow this crisis to go to waste. We have seen over recent months that where there is a will, Mr. Speaker, there is a way. And this administration has demonstrated that it has the will and that it will find the way. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we require the support of the Jamaican people. And it's support, Mr. Speaker, that I have no doubt that we will get. No more than ever, all Jamaicans must double down and support the national effort to keep the population healthy from COVID-19 and all other public health threats, Mr. Speaker. A critical and first step in this effort is the strict adherence to infection prevention and control measures, including the frequent washing of hands, the wearing of masks while in crowded situations, maintaining a 6 feet physical distance from others. We also need our people to abide by the quarantine restrictions, Mr. Speaker. Let me just say, Mr. Speaker, that as we move away from 100% testing, which we cannot practically do once we remove restrictions, we can do it when 500 persons are coming into the country. And we have an elaborate infrastructure at the airports to do that, over 130 healthcare professionals. But frankly speaking, when 20,000 are coming in, it's just practically impossible. The space doesn't allow it. The processing would not be restrictive and inconvenient. And so, Mr. Speaker, part of the new norm, if you will, is an approach that will enhance the surveillance mechanism, an approach that advances individual responsibility, persons taking care of themselves and by extension taking care of others. And Mr. Speaker, it's going to require a multi-stakeholder approach to observing the critical protocols that are going to be put in place, Mr. Speaker. So despite the challenges, the entire health system, Mr. Speaker, supported by all stakeholders, will have to be called into action. So now more than ever, Mr. Speaker, we need to recognize that we have to work together. Mr. Speaker, there's also a clear need for ongoing targeted behavioral change interventions that breathe life into the old adage, prevention is better than cure, Mr. Speaker. You know, if there's one thing I would like my own legacy to reflect in public health, and the legacy of this administration, is that health, in the typical interpretation of public health, which is about how many hospitals you have, how many hospital beds you have, how many surgeries you perform, how many medication you dispense, ought not to be the foundation of the definition of good public health. Good public health is founded in behavioral lifestyle practices that reduces or minimizes the risk of the need for hard hospital infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. And that's why I say it's not just about hospital, it's about behavioral change in the first instance. The reality is Jamaicans have to now cultivate the appetite to behave in a way, balancing diet, physical activity, knowing your health status, as we like to promote under the various programs. Behave in a way that makes us healthy and makes us enjoy life, for the most part, without having to visit a hospital for admission, for surgery, or otherwise. We can't live forever, Mr. Speaker, but we can certainly enjoy a life that doesn't require so much medication and hospital care that really and truly it's no quality life after all. And that's what public health should promote as a critical issue. So prevention is better than cure. It is true, Mr. Speaker, an unfailing commitment to prevention that Jamaica will be able to stay ahead of the devastation that COVID-19 can cause, as we have seen in other countries. In this, it is worth repeating, Mr. Speaker, as I've said over and over, that everyone counts. Everyone must get the basic message and implement that message for their own protection and, by extension, the collective. If there is one thing that our COVID-19 experience has taught us, it is that no government on its own, no single entity, no one individual can mount an effective response to any public health challenge, and particularly one at this scale. It is only by working together with the benefit of a sound plan and the required resources that we can and will beat COVID-19 and all other such public health challenges. Mr. Speaker, may God continue to bless and guide us as a people, this Jamaica land we love. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister could have continued. We were all enjoying his presentation. But may I ask for a recommittal of statement by ministers, Mr. Speaker?
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Statement by Minister. Minister Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As has been my practice since we started the CARE program, I've given periodic updates to Parliament on the progress, and I believe this is my fourth such update being circulated. The CARE program, Mr. Speaker, is the Government of Jamaica's temporary social and economic support program designed to cushion the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The program opened to applicants on the 9th of April and was closed as planned on the 30th of June. I'll begin with the headline numbers, Mr. Speaker. I will begin with the headline numbers. As at Wednesday, the 1st of July, disbursements had been made to 396,311 applicants out of 415,808 eligible applicants to date, for a payout ratio of 95%, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the program has a number of options, and I should note that eligible applicants is not a fixed number, but can change as persons update. To the extent they were not eligible and they fix one of their application criteria, they then become eligible. And in a few cases where the eligibility test has not been run yet. But of all those have been deemed to be eligible, 95% of the disbursements have been made. The best cash option, Mr. Speaker, was available to Tourism Board license operators and provides a grant of $18,000 for each employee they retain whose gross pay, excluding gratuities, is less than or equal to $1.5 million. These grants are paid for April, May, or June. In some cases, it would have been March, April, and May. Approximately 250 applications were received, and those would have been from companies, and remember, best cash is for companies in the tourism sector, broadly defined. And of these, 142 were ruled eligible and will receive grants for retaining some 14,000 employees. About 68 of the applicants failed eligibility by not having a Tourism Board license, and many of these applicants were entirely outside of the tourism industry and, just probably didn't understand. As disclosed in a previous statement, Mr. Speaker, the government will pay the statutory deductions related to these grants of $1,392 per employee for the employee portion and $2,400 for the employer's portion, for a total of $3,796. So instead of $18,000, it will be $21,796. There has been a delay in finalization of the best cash process due to several iterations of processing, validation, and audit with the Auditor General's Department, and this has caused a delay in payments. However, I'm informed, Mr. Speaker, that this has now concluded and payment instructions for best cash grants were authorized today. So, in respect of 14,000 persons who have retained employment in the tourism sector. Mr. Speaker, the set cash option was available to employees of any sector who were laid off after the 10th of March 2019, who earned less than or equal to $1.5 million per annum, and 3, for whom their employer uploaded a valid P45 evidencing their employment status. Approximately 32,970 applicants were ruled eligible for receipt of set cash grants. Set cash payments have now been made for the months of April and May for an average of 25,561 laid-off employees with valid bank accounts. The difference of just over 7,000 approved and eligible set cash applicants still have invalid accounts and the CARE bank accounts, and the CARE team is encouraging them by messages to update their payment information. Tax Administration Jamaica has done a review of previous eligibility results and is in the process of ruling an additional 1,500 applicants eligible for payment. The payments for the final month of June, as well as the payments for the new eligible 1,500, will be made by the week of the 20th of July with respect to that final component of the set cash payments. Mr. Speaker, with respect to compassionate grants, of approximately 375,088 eligible applications, transfers have been made in respect of 361,614, or just over 96%. The vast majority of the 4% have not received payment due to invalid bank accounts, and the CARE team is encouraging those applicants to update their payment information. We also had issue with approximately 1,000 pensioners who applied for a compassionate grant and who were receiving pension payments through the payroll of their former employer. And these were mostly persons who were employed to government agencies. They were therefore wrongly deemed to be employed and therefore deemed to be ineligible. TAJ has completed its due diligence to verify this employment status, and these applicants and payment will be transferred shortly. The number should be 450 and not 1,000. Apologies for that error. Mr. Speaker, the general grant was designed to benefit several occupational groups that were affected by the measures required to slow the spread of the coronavirus. For the general grants, application eligibility is determined by reference to an independent register maintained by the appropriate ministry or authority. These registries and the eligibility runs against these registries are by choice subject to the independent review of the Auditor General's Department prior to the authorization of payment. Now, Mr. Speaker, this can be admittedly time-consuming. It's time-consuming because those runs are sequential. You're running it against a batch provided by the particular regulatory authority or ministry. But it is necessary, Mr. Speaker, to increase the transparency of the exercise and to minimize the potential of grants being made to unintended beneficiaries. I now provide an update by occupational group. For the occupations that are linked with the Tourism Product Development Company, last week, all of those occupations, those who were deemed to be eligible, payments were transferred in respect of those occupations. So some 3,623 applicants who are airport red caps, RAF captains, tour guides, craft vendors, car producers, and contract carriage operators such as Juta, JCal, and Maxi would have been ruled eligible and payment batches created and disbursed. Payments were done through banks and remittance companies. There are a few discrepancies that are being dealt with for some applicants who were ruled ineligible even though they have a valid TPDCO registration and are in the data set. The issue there is attributed to them having selected the wrong occupation at the time of application. So if you are in the TPDCO list, but by error you click hairdresser, then clearly it's not going to go through. And there are a number of instances like that. So 3,200 of those occupational groups have already been processed and the payments made. The other occupational group, the bar operators, the eligibility program has been run and 2,200 operators have been ruled to be eligible. The Auditor General is reviewing those results and on completion, transfers will be executed. For entertainment practitioners, eligibility is determined with reference to a register certified by the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport. The eligibility program was executed for the 642 applications received, and the results, as is the process, were sent to the Auditor General for review. The Auditor General's Department queried some of the persons ruled eligible as they were deemed to be athletes and not entertainment practitioners, and so we had to communicate to the Ministry and say, look, your list needs to be redone and resent. And that is in a process of being done with just entertainment practitioners. The Ministry of Finance intends to make a separate provision for sports practitioners whose earnings have been interrupted by the pandemic, and that will be disbursed by the Ministry directly to those practitioners. Early childhood practitioners, approximately 3,697 applications were received. Again, eligibility is determined by reference to a register certified by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. The register was created and reviewed by the Auditor General's Department. There were certain anomalies and it was sent back to the Ministry for update, and the CARE team, once we get an updated list, we can run the verification again. So I want you to understand that the way in which it works to ensure that the intended beneficiaries are who receive, you have a certified list from the Ministry, Department or agency that's cross-checked with the Auditor General. If there are any discrepancies found, it has to be updated before eligibility is run. With the transport operators, we are at the stage of the data being sent to the AG department for review before loading and running of eligibility. And for the municipal registered occupations, there is the challenge of having those registrants in the data in the desired format. And that is projected to take 2 weeks to complete for that subset of the general grant occupational groups. But from the summary that I've just given, the occupational groups linked with TB, the Tourism Product Development Company, the bar operators, the entertainment practitioners, the early childhood practitioners, and the transport operators are fairly advanced, and I expect by the end of next week for transfers to be made with respect of those. For small businesses, we have had approximately 1,375 small business applications that have been ruled eligible, and those businesses have received their grants. The tourism grant was set at $1.2 billion, and we will be using the Exim Bank and their infrastructure for those grants to be disbursed. Small operators in the tourism sector will apply, and those operators will have to be registered with TPDCO, and they'll be eligible for grants from this facility. And the grants will be used to ensure that these operators can reopen as our borders open and activity begins to regain some pre-COVID levels. In terms of general issues, as with the last update provided, the number of invalid bank accounts has been a major issue. that has been wound down from about 100,000 to 22,000. But the activity of dealing with invalid bank accounts has been extremely demanding on the project team's time and resources. And can't stress that enough. The project is also faced with the challenges in the management of funds disbursed through credit unions, as the capability of credit unions is not uniform across that space. Some of the credit unions do not have the technological capability to verify recipients' accounts and response times when queries are raised about the payments. As a result, Mr. Speaker, other payment channels are being explored to facilitate disbursement of residual funds to the 20,000 beneficiaries or so across all types of grants who have not been able to collect funds for various reasons, including not having valid identification or not having a valid bank account. Other governments have used these kind of alternative channels, Mr. Speaker, and some of those are the new channels of that various financial services companies have innovated over the past 12 months or so. These are channels using debit cards and using mobile channels and so forth. Mr. Speaker, the airports have reopened and the tourism sector is gradually reopening. Other sectors that had partially closed have also started reopening on a phased basis. In addition, the extension of the curfew hours is restoring the viability of other sectors. Jobs are slowly being restored. However, we have a long, long way to go towards recovery. Given these realities, Mr. Speaker, the government of Jamaica will be extending the Set Cash and the Best Cash grants for an additional 2 months for July and August. These beneficiaries who have been in receipt of Set Cash and Best Cash grants, and remember I told you the numbers, were approximately instead of receiving 3 monthly grants, they will now receive 5 monthly grants, Mr. Speaker, and just under 50,000 Jamaicans will benefit from this extension of the Set Cash and the Best Cash grants. Now, I want to, these category of Jamaicans, Mr. Speaker, for the most part, even though they're persons drawn from many, many sectors, from all sectors, they're workers, and they are all earning, they were earning below 1.5 million. They would have, some of them taken out loans, and in some cases mortgages, and we want to give as much time for the recovery to happen and continue to support. The other thing to note, Mr. Speaker, and I've heard some of the comments, is that 120 days since the first case occurs on the 10th of July. Under our labor laws, after 120 days of being laid off, the former minister will tell you that the employee can begin discussions for redundancy. Now, from our conversation with both employer and with the select employees we have spoken to, certainly the labor leaders, there is no desire to precipitate that. No one wants what is a temporary situation to become permanent. However, if things are totally dry, then what might happen is what we don't want might actually happen. And a part of the decision for extending has to do with ensuring we don't have sort of perverse incentives. We can't, obviously the government can't stand in and stop things from unfolding. But with 50,000 persons being in receipt of additional stipends beyond the 120-day period, it gives more opportunity for recovery to take place, for more jobs to take place. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. For people making less than 1.5. Yes, $18,000 a month, yes. So it just gives a little more time for some recovery. Now, it's clearly not something the government can do indefinitely, but this was certainly unexpected and not something that we had necessarily, just the way things have unfolded in terms of how the capacity has been used, it provides opportunity for this extension. Mr. Speaker, just in concluding on this section, the CARE program has dispersed 95% in respect of eligible applications. The period for new applications has expired, and we expect to conclude transfers during the month of July. In many ways, the last mile is the most difficult, and transfers of the general grants are inextricably linked to the quality of registrant data received. We, Mr. Speaker, requested the concurrent Auditor General's review to increase levels of assurance and transparency and to reduce the incidence of grants being made to unintended beneficiaries. There is no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that this slows the process. However, given the unprecedented scale and scope of this program, and given the speed of its launch and implementation, this kind of review is absolutely what is required, as these grants are, at the end of the day, financed with taxpayer dollars. And taxpayers must always know that duty of care has been, is being, and will be exercised in the use of their funds. Now, Mr. Speaker, I just want to use the opportunity of giving a statement just to add a few comments outside of the CARE envelope on gaming lounges. I want to use this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to announce the reopening of gaming lounges effective Wednesday, July 8th, which is next Wednesday. This decision comes... No, sorry, Wednesday, July 8th is tomorrow. I've had this for It is next Wednesday, which is tomorrow. It is the next Wednesday. The decision comes following the development and publication of COVID-19 reopening and operating protocols by the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Commission in consultation with the gaming lounge operators. The protocols have been reviewed by the Ministry of Health and Wellness and received a no objection from the public health authorities. Gaming lounges, Mr. Speaker, are the last segment of Jamaica's gambling industry to reopen. They make a significant contribution to economic activity and employment in Jamaica. For the financial year ending March 2020, gaming lounges generated $490 million of direct revenue for government outside of any PAYE deductions and GCT contributions, just by virtue of what they pay to the betting over through the licenses and charges to do with gaming. The industry employs hundreds of Jamaicans and has multiple direct and indirect linkages with other sectors in the economy, Mr. Speaker, and we're happy to announce the reopening of gaming lounges effective tomorrow, Wednesday, July 8th. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, the protocols have been published. That would be another statement. The protocols for the gaming lounges have been developed by the regulator, with the operators, and has been reviewed by the Ministry of Health. And those protocols have been published. They're on, I believe they're with the BGLC. BGLC is published, will be publishing them once my notice has gone out. Okay? And these were approved a week ago, but we waited for other openings to happen before announcing this particular opening. And notably, it follows the opening of the cinemas, I believe 2 weeks ago, announced by Minister of Local Government, and the opening of other subsectors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Goldie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Minister for this update on the CARE program. And the information provided underscores the challenges that the program has had in the verification and cash distribution systems that have been employed. In a sense, the banking sector has fallen short insofar as so many persons with bank accounts have struggled to receive payments through that medium. And indeed, the remittance companies have, I think, provided an easier channel than the bank accounts. And we do sympathize with the members of the team who, as the Minister has said, have had to cope with the demands on their time and resources of dealing with the challenges of sorting out a range of issues with the bank accounts that persons have preferred as their means to be paid. It is noticeable that though this program really was a program of 3 months between April through June, many of the categories have not actually seen payments being made yet, especially in relation to the general grant, where the entertainment practitioners and the bar operators and so on, early childhood practitioners, some taxi operators are still waiting to receive the promised benefit. And we hope that these issues can be resolved. The building in of the Auditor General's Department into the process as a sort of precursor to disbursement rather than auditing post-payment obviously has the benefits of minimizing any risks of persons being paid who ought not to be paid. On the other hand, it has built into the process some amount of additional delay. Mr. Speaker, I had a few questions I wish to ask the Minister. I note that the decision has been taken to extend 2 categories within the CARE program for support during the months of July and August, namely the so-called best cash, which is the tourism operators, as an incentive for them to keep persons on their payroll, and the set cash, who are persons who are employees from a range of different industries or former employees who are laid off, I think, after March the 10th and were earning less than $1.5 million. And that subset is 50,000 persons or thereabouts, and we are glad to hear that they will continue to receive some support for July and August. Of course, we are very disappointed that the recipients of the compassionate grant, the $10,000 for persons who were unemployed, the most vulnerable in the society, that there is no good news for them. There were nearly 400,000 eligible applications in that category. It was abruptly cut off mid-April, and despite repeated calls for more to be done for those persons, we're not seeing anything being announced for them, which we're, yeah. So, yes. So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask if the Minister could just clarify a few things for me. In relation to the bar operators, the eligibility program that has been run, what was the means test for eligibility for bar operators? At one time, I was under the impression that it may be a liquor license having been granted. Another time, there was a question of, I think, a trade and business license. I did some research on that, actually, which I shared with the Minister of Local Government and Community Development as to the fact that it appeared on my reading of the Act that bar operators who had a liquor license did not need to have a double up with a trade and business license. So I'm interested to know what is the criteria, or what are the criteria being applied for that category. I was also like, if you could please, Minister, speak to what's the total amount of expenditure under the CARE program to date, roughly, and what do you expect with the remaining kinks that are being worked out and the extension of the 18,000 times 2 times 50. What is the total expenditure you anticipate thus far? Assuming nothing further comes, though, the sotto voce remarks from the chuckler suggest there may be some further announcements in due course. But as it stands today, if we could just find out what the total is, Mr. Speaker. We know the situation is fairly grim out there. Statin has measured the growth for the first quarter of 2020 as negative, I think, 2.3%, which is quite significantly worse than the negative 1.7% that the PIOJ had projected. We know that the PIOJ was projecting negative growth for this current quarter just ended, the June quarter that just ended, of between 12 and 14% negative. I haven't heard what the PIOJ has projected for the fiscal year as the growth outcome, but I know that UNCTAD has indicated that they are projecting, I think, 11% negative growth for Jamaica for 2020. So there are a lot of different numbers and projections floating around. The IMF, the government's projection at the time of the supplementary budget was negative 5.1%. I don't know if there's any adjustments for that. But just to say that clearly the population is going to be increasingly stressed with the slow reopening of the economy. Public health considerations remain paramount. We are not out of the woods. Every day now we're seeing 5, 6, 4 additional cases, 7, well, it varies, but thank God it's not more, but it's fairly constant, and it shows you that a little slip up here or there and we could have a cluster and we could have a problem. So, the social distancing imperatives continue, and the minister has exhorted us not to relax. COVID's still there, as he said. So, yeah. So with all of that, we know that it's going to be a slow road to recovery, and therefore, the population, especially the more vulnerable segments of the population, the lower quintiles of the earning ladder, are going to really come under additional pressure. And although, thankfully, after an initial dip in remittances, they picked up, we were told, after mid-April, and they were close to year-on-year numbers, prior year numbers. I don't know what has happened since. And, we know that some of the U.S. Fiscal effort to the stimulus of the U.S. government, which involved, a very widespread disbursement to citizens of the U.S. of over $1,000, would have enabled many Jamaicans who are citizens of the United States to maintain their remittance payments in what were otherwise very dire economic circumstances there. So overall, Minister, we are anxious to see and to hear more as to what will be done to protect the population. The CARE program really is for 1 quarter. We have quarters to come, and the best cash, set cash group, that 50,000, will get an additional 2 months of support, and we give thanks for that. But it's a fairly small group in the scheme of things, and I'm particularly concerned by those who have been unemployed for long periods of time, predating March the 10th, and don't have any form of resources saved away to protect them and their families, and they live hand to mouth day to day. And in a contracting economy, the fallout is severe and will continue to soak in. So, Minister, if you could just give the information that, as best you can, on how much has been spent so far on the CARE. What are you anticipating will be the total based on what the information you have now? And if you could explain the eligibility criteria for the bar operators, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Mr. Jackson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, just a quick comment on 2 items. Page 3, the early childhood practitioners and the transport taxi bus operators. In regards to the early childhood practitioners, my colleague from Southeast St. Andrew had raised the matter here before. Minister, through you, Mr. Speaker, you say you're waiting for feedback with from Ministry of Education. It must be treated as a matter of urgency. The early childhood workers, teachers, and others in those institutions, they earn very little for a very, very important service that they provide to the communities. And it must be treated with some urgency. Connected to the schools in general, the school bus operators in Portmore, not just in my constituency, I have met with them a number of times. All their incomes have been eroded because of the closure of the schools, and therefore their buses for which they have payment notes at the banks have been piling up on them. They are in dire straits. They have applied as individuals, not as an association. None of them, I can speak categorically of those in Portmore, because I meet with them through their association. None of them have gotten any of these grants that you speak about. So, Minister, I want to plead to you. These are not statistics. These are real live persons with families in serious distress. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Daly.
Mr. Speaker, Minister, I always appreciate when you give the updates on the CARE program. And sometimes we ask you, sometimes you have your team in the corner there, we ask for some information, and we hope you'll get it the next time you speak. The last time you gave an update, I specifically asked you if you could break down on a parish by parish basis the payments on the compassionate grants, and you had indicated, you had said yes. The payout, you know, we got the applications on a parish by parish basis. Well, no, that's a totally different thing. 96% payout, don't tell me how much, what percentage in Kingston, how many people in Kingston, how many people. You have a secretariat, the CARE team, I'd like to big them up too, you know, for the work they're doing to put things together and sort out this and sort out that. We do have some very good public sector workers in the country, and I want to commend them. We'd like a breakout. Yeah, that's not complex for them to give you what that is. We'd like to know, because you gave us the applications on a parish by parish basis. We would like to get the payout on a parish by parish basis. All right, 2 things, 3 things really. Page 3, and I noticed this trend throughout. Bar operators, the eligibility program has been run, and approximately 2,200 operators have been ruled eligible. Ruled. But how many people applied? These are very important questions, because I said in the first instance, I have 31 bars in Anion Town, bridge to bridge, and I know some of them applied. I know some of them went down to do their registration at the municipal corporation, but I also am aware that some of them do have their bar license, their spirit license, as the member from South St. Andrew said. When you pass through, and the yellow bar at the bridge at the end, near to K Valley, 31. Yeah, but what we're getting from your staff who prepare for you is those who have been ruled eligible, and we are not getting how many. It's good to see the information. How many were ruled out for whatever reason? And the same thing happens with the small business grant. There are several small businesses in Jamaica, but only 1,375 business applications have been ruled eligible. Only 1,375. And it strikes out at me. If you're getting a grant for your small business, everybody, yes, that's less than 100 small businesses per parish. And I'm saying, how many small businesses applied for the grant? Is that a reasonable question, member from Northeast Manchester? How many people applied for the grant? And it goes right through the thing. On your, I'm a very, and several persons have spoken. From day one, we have been batting for the compassionate grants. I call you, I talk to you, I write you, I text you. But you always reply, I must say, we should think about reopening it for the poor people. Yes. The compassionate grant is for the ordinary poor citizen who is not getting in the PATH program. I even asked the question, if you're on the PATH, can you get it? And they said yes. But it's for people who are unemployed, the farmers out there, everybody who apply for it and can't get it. There's nothing in any of the care packages that I have seen with all the 4 or 5 updates for farmers. Because the Minister of Agriculture announced 240 million for small farmers.
Point of order there. Just to give you the
yes, yes.
You're live. I don't. No. Remember the CARE program consists of the core program which you access through the WeCare website, but it also is complemented by resources that are channeled through ministries, departments, and agencies and existing programs. On the very first day that the CARE program was announced at the end of March, we had allocated $200 million through the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture, and Fisheries for farmers. In the supplementary budget, we added $800 million. So the CARE program has $1 billion through to fishermen and farmers, of which there are many, through the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture, and Fisheries. I am reporting here on the core element that is managed by the Ministry of Finance. Yes.
For your reminder, on the compassionate grant now, we know that the bulk, this is where I have a little problem now. The vast majority of the 4% that have not been paid, not received payment due to invalid bank account. So you're saying those are the persons who gave banks as the vehicle through which they are to be paid. I just want to know, because the bulk of these people in compassionate grant were paid through Western Union and other such institutions, the bulk of them. And we remember all the chaos and so on which worked through to try and, people stand up in the lines. So I'm saying the 4% and this bank account, invalid bank account, would be who? You get my argument? Yeah. The taxi operators now, and I'm going to say a word about the early childhood practitioners. The early childhood practitioners fall under the general grant. And in most, I'm going to say basic schools that we all have, some of the teachers are paid by the Ministry of Education. So you might have 5 teachers in the basic school, but only 2 are being paid, or 1 or 2. And the minister who are here can correct me, how many persons have been paid now? Well, I know it's like 1 or 2 persons, so you have the trained one. 1 trained, 1 or 2 trained ones. So you might have 50 students, you have 5 teachers, but only 2 are paid, and they continue to receive their pay during the summer holidays. Normal payment. Is that so for Minister? Right. But the other 3 or 4 teachers depend on the collection from the fees to pay them. So these are the persons who would send in their application that the member from South St. Catherine spoke about. This is the category that we have to speed up. This is the category, along with the taxi operators, that we really have to get it can't take long for the Ministry of Education to validate whether or not these teachers are in these early childhood institutions. I don't like to see when one ministry is saying we are waiting the other ministry to validate. if these people are really there. Yes, it's not two separate states. It's a simple thing. And we have hard-working staff at the Ministry of Education, and we have hard-working staff at the Ministry of Finance and Planning.
Mr. Daly, yes. Mr. Daly.
So the question is,
okay.
For the transport operators, I want to make sure that I understand, because people have been asking me. You have 3 taxis, red plate, and I'm talking now the people's language. And you have some drivers who drive these 3 taxis. You're the owner of these 3 taxis. You can only get a grant for one of the cars, is that correct? One of the vehicle. And what is it the drivers of those cars will get or can get? Because since March they have not done much, schools closed, things have been very bad, and for the 5 or 6 taxis or 3 taxis that I have parked for the 3 months or 4 months, I have to be paying my licenses and whatever. What is it they and why is it so difficult to process these for the taxi operators? What's the real problem that we are faced with there?
Mr. Bunting, you mentioned that you wanted to. Okay, you want to?
All right, thank you, members, for the questions. I mean, the CARE program, responding to the greatest sort of economic crisis that we have had, is very ambitious in scope to deal with approximately 500,000 applications in a very short period of time. And I keep stressing that 95% of eligible applications have already been paid. Now, with respect to the questions about the banking sector, it is certainly the case that we have had enormous difficulties in channeling funds through the banking sector for the demographic group that makes up the applications. And that gives us some information that policy will have to respond to. In some cases, those errors were due to errors that the applicants made, wrong account number don't match branch, name don't match branch, and so on. But in many instances, the problems with bank accounts were on the other side, or a combination of the two. Regulatory, accounts that were not used for more than a certain period were seen as dormant, and expired ID means that the account is not accessible, and so forth. And that has taken, I want you to appreciate, and I heard some appreciation for this point, but the CT rate has an enormous amount of time to go from 100,000 bank accounts that were deemed invalid at first and to whittle those all the way down to just under 20. And with those 20, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to try a different approach using a different modality altogether. But I should sort of point out, however, that all is not sort of lost with our banking sector. I mean, as a factual matter, overall, more payments went through the banking system eventually than through the remittance system. So overall, I think the number is 62% of the payments went through the banking system eventually. And of the compassionate grant, 46% went through. But going through would have meant, that taking that 100,000, bringing it down to 20, so it went through with some amount of effort. Now, faced with the challenge of processing what would be the largest number of applications for, certainly in a time frame of any program that we can just recall, programs can have subscription of that level, but those subscriptions are gained over years. This is 500,000 sort of attempted subscription within a couple of days. And so the strategy used, as you would well understand, was a strategy that made sure the most people were able to benefit in the shortest possible time. which required emphasis and focus on the compassionate grant first. And that focus on the compassionate grant proved to be, I think, even in retrospect, the right thing to do, because we were able to get over 300,000 persons dealt with in a matter of a few weeks. And once that was dealt with, then the attention was on the next largest category, which would have been the set cash payments of persons who were employed formally and who lost their job due to the COVID pandemic. And after that, we turned our attention to the best cash, which is the next largest in terms of numbers, which is why we can say that 95% have been paid. Now, of those that remain, most are in the general grant categories. So I just wanted the sequence has been deliberate to ensure that the most people benefit in the shortest time. If we had started with some of the smaller application groups, we wouldn't have covered a universe of 95% in this time frame. A question was asked about bar operators and what was the qualification test. The qualification test for bar operators was that they were paid up at the tax authority for the license. So actually having a license in hand, and I think it's called a tavern license in some cases, requires the applicant to go to court and to get a document sanctioned or produced by the court. The application criteria didn't require that. It just required that you have evidence that you've paid the amount in order to be in line for that certificate. And I believe the amount was $5,000. And you will recall that we announced the program at the beginning of April, but we gave until the 30th of April for applicants to obtain that certification. So that is what would have been employed. Yeah, that you'd have had to go to TAJ and pay for it, right? Yes. So the TRN for the business would show that for the particular year or particular period you've paid the license. And obviously you would gain several times the license fee in the grant. The grant being set at $40,000, the regulatory fee be set at $5,000. A question has been asked, how much has it costed to date? I will answer the question in terms of once we process all of and pay all of them, it's going to be approximately $12 billion. And here I am including all components, i.e. including the components that go through the ministries. So the grant to the Ministry of Local Government, the grants to the Ministry of Commerce, the grants to the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, in addition to the grants that are administered through the electronic portal. No. So the cost based on the applications and the processing of those applications is approximately $12 billion. That's our estimate of it, not 11.8 to be more precise. With the extension of, and let me just talk about extension for the time being. As we mentioned, these are persons who would be been formally employed and in situations where unlike some of the other occupational groups for which some recovery, and it's not universal, but some recovery is happening or is likely to happen, persons in these categories are probably in that category for a longer period of time. The extension for 2 months will cost approximately I'm giving approximate numbers, $540 million for best cash. And here we're assuming 15,000 employees who you're paying on behalf of. Now remember, the number can fluctuate in the sense that depends on how much the employer retains. So let's say we're paying in July or August, but the employer has taken on more people below the threshold, then they'd qualify for more. But our assumption, we have paid on the basis of 14,000, so far. We're assuming 15,000 for July and August. And if that is the case, it will be about 540 million. And for the set cash, we're assuming 40,000 persons. And on that basis, it will be about 1.44 billion. So put them together, and it's about an extra $2 billion that it would cost. With respect to the compassionate grant, as I gave a commitment that we would review it and we would look at it. Given the significance of the 10th of July, and I know the former Minister of Labour understands the significance, it was necessary at this stage to announce the extension of the set cash and best cash. But I did undertake to take a look at it, and we will with reference to budget remaining and so forth. With respect to, and I did also give a commitment that we'll be looking towards measures that can assist with back-to-school initiatives. With respect to the question on growth, no, I'm saying that I'm just repeating what I'd said previously, that so in extending the set and the best, there are other things that we have given a commitment to look at, and those commitments remain. But I'm not in a position to speak to them now, and what motivates the extension of the set and the best at this particular time, the 7th of July, is to do it in advance of the 10th of July, which is a 120-day anniversary, right? With respect to the question on growth, PIOJ had projected 4 to 6. They gave a range for this fiscal year. Clearly, these are estimates at a point in time. And I want, everybody should be cognizant that though all sectors are affected, we have to be very aware that the hospitality sector, which is measured in the Statin data as hotels and restaurants, but hospitality or tourism is larger than hotel and restaurants. Hotel and restaurants make about 8% of GDP, and for the March quarter would have declined by 14 points, January to March. And for the June quarter, March to June, estimated to decline by 85%. Okay, there's no other sector that comes even close in comparison. So, and when you bear in mind that the hotel and restaurant sector has been the most consistent and highest growing sector over 25 years in Jamaica, meaning it is a sector that has grown at 3% a year, compounded over 25 years. And if you, in the COVID Economic Task Force report, which will come out shortly, have a graph that has all of the sectors from 1997. And tourism has a highest gradient and the most investment. And all the other sectors are like this, right? And as a result, when it declines by 85%, it took 20 years for the output to increase by 85%. Right? So output between 1997 and 2000 increased by 87% to be exact, in real terms. And in one quarter, output will decline by 85%. Now the capacity still exists, right? So it's not a like-for-like comparison. Huh? Yeah, we haven't lost the capital investment, but the output, and that's to put it in a very stark way, what we're facing. And therefore, while we are doing things across all sectors, there's no doubt that if we want to, we cannot recover without tourism recovering. And that sector is hit in a way that is very, very problematic for the rest of the economy. Yeah? With respect to the comments made on the early childhood operators and the transport operators, absolutely, what we're being here is just being absolutely transparent. This is a national program, and there's no need to, we've been of where exactly we are. And the process with the occupational link grants is that you need the authority to say who actually is an early childhood educator. And it's on that list that you'll be paid. And I think it's 25 or or 40, one of the two, 25 or 40. I'll tell you in a second. It's a one time. But the one time is almost, those guys got 54 over 3 months, they may get 40 one time. Right, so we're working assiduously to get it done. But members will understand that if you verify against a list that's being produced at the time of this process, transparency requires that that list be independently looked at, right? If you're going to design the thing properly. And so, at great inconvenience, we have inserted that into the process. And it is what it is. And every effort is being made to ensure on the part of the ministries themselves, the authorities themselves, to make sure that those lists are provided and answers to the Auditor General's queries are made in time for the payments to be given. The question on invalid bank accounts, you're asking about the 4%. I didn't totally get the question, but when we say 20,000, when we say we reduced in 100,000 valid bank accounts, we're saying 100,000 across all categories of applications. And remember, the categories outside of the compassionate grant were the ones that would have the greater proportion of bank accounts. So in the compassionate category, we have 4% outstanding, and there are different issues. One of the issues was the pension payment, pensions going through the payroll. But a lot of it is for bank accounts that remain invalid and the persons have not updated the bank accounts. Okay? And with respect to the question on the taxes, with the question on the number, I can get that data for you on number who applied, but I want you to understand the dynamic that when you open a program like this, and anybody's free to go on the website, you would have had a lot of persons applying for things and they're not even in that occupational group, right? So I can provide that data to you, but what I want you to know is that, we can provide that data, member. For the question on the taxis, if an operator has more than one taxi, how the program is designed is that it's a transfer per license. No. So it's per, it's a per PPV number, right? So you have a PP number, you can have more than one taxi, right?
No, please, Minister, make sure, because the taxi operators out there listening, so between yourself and the Minister of Transport need to verify that. Because if you have 5 taxis, all PPV license, when you apply, you get and you put in all 5, it's only one you get the grant for. One says that all PPV license that you have. If you're a tour operator, you have 5 bus. Let us say you have 5 bus from Point Hill come here, 5 coasters. All red plate. One you get for. Is that so?
Yes.
So please clarify.
Yes. The semantics, I was using the wrong. But the result of it is that you get per person. So if you have 1 or 3, it's 1 grant. Okay? And we're trying to have the amount of resources allocated for this exercise to be spread as far as possible, and this is how we get it to spread. Now, with respect to the drivers, we made it very clear. Many drivers would have applied for a compassionate grant. Okay? So drivers are not excluded because compassionate grants would have been open to them. I believe those are the questions to date, Mr. Speaker, and I'll answer others as they arise.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, through you to the minister, I want to touch again on the education sector. And we've been for the last couple of weeks debating a motion by the member from Central Kingston on the importance of that sector. And it's one of the, I think, something that almost every parliamentarian supports and understands. And so you can appreciate why everybody is so concerned with this. Minister, we're facing the likelihood of many basic schools closing. And although you have this one-time grant to 3,000 odd, there are over 6,000 teachers in the basic school system. There are 75,000 children, 75,000. The implications are not just for the children, although that is severe since we know that early childhood stimulation is the most important. But it provides a sort of daycare for the parents and mostly mothers, and it allows them to earn income as well. So if there's no basic school, for many of those mothers, it's going to severely limit their ability to earn because they will now have to do home daycare, and often they'll have to do it themselves. So, Minister, it is critical. We quoted, one of the most highly quoted studies is that the highest return on investment for almost any public investment is on early childhood education, certainly more than any other sector of the education system. Private schools, many particularly church-operated schools, will not be able to go through till December unless they get some external injection. And so, Minister, I really want to ask you, this is a start, but I really want you to look at. There are other things that I think the society would be prepared to sacrifice to allow the basic schools and the rest of the private system to get some assistance just to carry them through maybe to December. If we don't do it and they collapse, those children will end up, we still have a responsibility to school them in the public system. So it's not as if the budget will escape having to provide for them. And then it will compound the challenges of social distancing, etc. So I really want to appeal to you. I know if my colleague, the House Leader, was here, he would support me in this, to look at finding some way to provide some assistance to these, even though we might call them technically private, but most of them are church-operated, prep schools, basic schools, community or church-operated. They're not private in the traditional private sector sense of schools operated for profit. So I really want to know if you will find a way to provide some assistance to this sector.
Minister, there's two sets of questions. In the last update you provided to Parliament, you gave us a parish-by-parish breakdown. For the parish of Kingston, it was recipients, beneficiaries. You had a total of 16. It was applicants? Okay, all right, applicants, okay. You had a total of 69,021 applicants for the parish of Kingston. And then for the parish of St. Andrew, a total of 41,909. I found it strange because Kingston has, as a parish, only has 3 constituencies, 3 political constituencies. And if you add the total number of eligible voters, it is probably around 69,000. St. Andrew, on the other hand, has 12 constituencies with probably a total of maybe 250, close to 300,000 voters. Now, I don't know if it's a case where persons put Kingston 6 and then they classify them as Kingston. I don't know. I'm asking to clarify that because it seems unusually high that Kingston would have so many applicants versus St. Andrew, which is 4 times the number. And I ask against the background of the Auditor General's own report about the pass system, where she identified that there were 700 and odd beneficiaries who were not eligible, who received payments of about 5.4 million from the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. So I don't know how the system picks up addresses, whether this is a genuine oversight or mistake, or whether there is something more that needs to be probed. But it seems very unusual that Kingston would have such a high level of applicants versus a parish like St. Andrew.
Thank you for raising that, member. I think it's very easy to explain in that on the application portal, persons are asked to put their address in, and there's a drop-down menu for parish. And you put, a lot of people would just say, I live on Headley Close. They don't even put the number, and they go and they select the parish. And as I'm sure you do, as I do, many times when people ask you which parish you are in Jamaica, even though you say Kingston. You don't put, there are very few people who actually live in St. Andrew who identify as living in St. Andrew. So what would have happened is that persons on the drop menu selected Kingston instead of selecting St. Andrew. And you can understand that most people, you take people who, people who live in areas that I represent, Patrick City or Duhaney Park or so on, or I represent some of it, not all of it. The identity, your self-identity is not that you live in St. Andrew. Your identity is that you live in Kingston. So presented with a drop menu, you don't select St. Andrew. You select Kingston. So that's the explanation. And I can easily provide I'll ask the eGov to provide the similar data on recipients.
House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask. Oh, Jesus, please. No, that was a burning one, so I just had to answer that one. Totally forgot about you. No, we have no departure on that point. As a St. Richard's Primary alumnus, early childhood education is where the action is and where the action needs to be. And what we are, a lot of people speak about a lost, this or a lost that, right? If we're not careful, lose a segment here or a segment there. And we're going to make sure within the capacities that we have that we don't leave anybody behind. And I know that the member from North St. Andrew, who is the Minister of Education, would make the point that you have raised as forcefully or more forcefully and has made it to me. So we're going to try to find a way of providing support, which is why I have, just come here today with just these two that are necessary because of the 10th of July. And hopefully we'll just apply some more thought and ideas as to how we're going to deal with that particular challenge, which is worthy of a response. And yes, happy to get your ideas on that as well. Mr. Speaker, I ask for recommittal of notice of motion given orally.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Notices of motion given orally.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice at the next meeting of the House. I'll move the following motion. The Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act, the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Nomination, Selection and Appointment to Boards Regulation 2020 Resolution. Whereas by virtue of Section 24(1)(c) of the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the Minister may make regulations generally for giving effect to the provisions and purposes of the Act, and may in particular specify criteria for the appointment of boards of public bodies. And whereas on the 3rd day of July 2020, the Minister made the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Nomination, Selection and Appointment to Boards Regulation 2020. And whereas by virtue of Section 24 subsection 2 of the Act, any regulations made under subsection 1 shall be subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas it is desirable that the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Nomination, Selection and Appointment to Boards Regulations 2020 be affirmed by resolution, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows, This resolution may be cited as the public body's management and accountability, nomination, selection, appointment to boards, regulations, 2020 resolution, and the public body's management and accountability, nomination, selection, and appointment to boards, regulations, 2020, which was laid on the table of the House on the 7th day of July, 2020, is hereby affirmed.
Just a minute. Are we asking it to be affirmed now?
We're just laying them on the House.
I haven't gotten a copy.
There.
I need a copy because I need to see what is involved. Minister, I'm on my feet. I need to see what is involved in this resolution. I cannot come in because I am very concerned, very cautious. One came before, Mr. Speaker, to amend the appointment of boards and what have you. And we had a problem. So I need to read through what the changes are before we can go forward. Very, very concerned because I cannot, let me say it, I can't be a member of parliament and I can recommend a school board. I don't want to debate it now. I can't be a member of parliament and I can recommend a school board. I don't see how you can have elected persons like a councillor can serve on a board. And I can't see how you have ministers who can recommend board if that is what is coming.
Minister Clark.
No. So, Mr. Speaker, the regulations are tabled and the member will have opportunity to read it. Hopefully, God willing, we'll take it next week. These regulations were passed in this House passed in the last fiscal year, I believe in December or January, probably January of this year, and they went to the Senate. The time has elapsed because there were certain dates in there which made it, those dates having passed, it made it redundant for the Senate to therefore pass it, and hence it was withdrawn from the Senate, and I'm retabling it here, and there are two amendments as compared with what was originally tabled. The first is to, by regulation, require that all public boards have a minimum of 30% of each gender, Mr. Speaker. And I hope that is something that would be greeted with a better reaction than that. The second, and there is another amendment, Mr. Speaker, whereby in the regulations that were passed early in January, senators would have been prohibited from serving on boards. These amended regulations make allowance for up to 4 Senate, rather than a total exclusion. It limits the number who can serve at any one point in time. But we'll have a full opportunity to discuss, hopefully to take it next week, member, and we can discuss between now and then, and maybe on the floor next week. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Warmington.
I am very disturbed what I'm hearing here. They're going to limit senators who can serve on board. 1 and 2, agenda-based situation. No, Mr. Minister, I'm talking, don't let me wait, I didn't tell the wait. You're telling me now that a board got to be determined by agenda? When we come into this house and went out there for election, we didn't talk about gender. We talk about candidates. So there has to be some serious amendment to this before I support it, and I know that's not my view alone. So I'll ask the minister to think carefully. Hold on. We're not with withdraw. And we can't talk about you're going to limit the amount of senators who can serve. Maybe we're limiting councillors also. To exclude councillors also.
Mr. Warmington.
I'll wait till next week.
Yes.
By all means, I have to be here.
That's what I was going to say. You have a chance to. You have a chance to participate in the debate next week.
I am vehemently opposed to this. I haven't seen I haven't seen it, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Daly.
But what I'm hearing now from my learned colleague is that he exclude even a councillor from serving in a school board.
Mr. Daly, we'll have a chance to debate it next week.
Okay.
So therefore, you can
we
make
will come prepared.
Contribution then.
Mr. Speaker, there be no further business today. I move for adjournment of today's sitting and to reconvene next week, Tuesday, on the 14th of July, Mr. Speaker, at 2 p.m.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. This Honorable House now stands adjourned.